These corporations obviously do not want these changes to happen. So there is a lot of industry interference. There is a lot of conflicts of interest when you attempt to implement policies. For example, if you want a country to reduce their consumption of sugary beverages, you will face all the power of these corporations, which they not only own these industries, but they are also the owners of the industry of the communication. I think it's very important to have a policy of healthy taxes for junk food, which is basically sugary beverages and ultra-processed products. These products cause a lot of negative externalities and government expenditure, so you at least need to put this tax to compensate. And in addition to these taxes, you need to put other healthy taxes. So, for example, taxes to the alcohol consumption and tobacco consumption, which is not really linked to obesity, but is linked to cancer and to many other diseases. The way in which we inform and we do action to prevent obesity is not working. Mainly, we are focusing on the individual responsibility. So the world used to think that obesity was a problem of a failure in the individual, bad decisions. And we know now that it's more a problem of how we shape our environment and what are the access to healthy foods and the conditions of the people to do physical activity, to have information.
I'm really, really happy to have this conversation with you. So, give me insights into the World Obesity Atlas from the perspective of the Federation. What is the goal of the Atlas? What are you trying to achieve with the Atlas?
Thank you, Paul. Well, the World Obesity Atlas is a compilation of the information from all the countries around the world on the conditions, the epidemiological condition of having this disease that is obesity, and with different stratifications. So, for example, how many adult people living with obesity or overweight, also how many children, but not only that, but what is the response in the country, whether or not the country has a national plan to prevent obesity, what are the actions that the country is doing. For example, if the country has a sugary beverage taxes or any other intervention, and what are the main challenges. So it's very useful. It has even like a section with country profiles, in which if you are of any country, you can just download your profile, and that will help you promote advocacy action in your country, also to identify inequalities, identify opportunities. But yes, we want this to be a tool to promote action, because we are concerned that the world is not arriving to 2025 having met the targets of weight or non-communicable disease prevention. And this is very much because we have not been able to control obesity and overweight around the world.
Give me insights into the data collection and the process of putting the atlas together.
Well, the collection was made by the countries mostly. So this is a compilation. For example, in my country, in Mexico, we have the National Nutrition Survey that is collected. It was collected every 5 years or 6 years, but now it's collected every year. So we collect all this information and we send it to different institutes, and we share it with WHO, with the Institute of Health Metrics in Seattle. And then World Obesity Federation uses all the databases around the world to obtain the best possible information, and systematize it, unify it in a way that you can analyze and compare different countries. So that is the process, and it's a very complex process that takes a lot of time. So that's one component. And then about the findings, I will say one of the main ones is that we find that there is an increase in body mass index. So the way we evaluate in a population level the obesity, and we are not meeting these targets of reductions of non-communicable diseases for 2025. We find that there are 160 million adult person years of non-communicable chronic disease, and that the body mass index is increasing and will be increasing during the next years, mostly in middle and low income countries. So that's the other concerning finding that you will say, well, this is a problem of very developed nations, but on reality, it will hit and affect more to the middle income and poor nations of the globe.
I'm curious to know whether we have insights into what is driving this fastest rise in obesity prevalence in middle income countries compared to others.
Well, we have a very good idea because the information is very robust and the patterns are the same around the world with different speeds and characteristics. But it's basically that the world is experiencing a nutrition transition and there are some failures in the system. So we are replacing the real, natural, healthy foods with ultra processed products, which is like basically products that you can eat but are made in a factory. It's not real food, and you see that the amount of these products that you eat as a population is in a very direct relationship with the prevalence of obesity in the country. So the countries that have more consumption of junk food, ultra processed products, and sweetened sugary beverages have higher prevalences of obesity. So we think it's a failure of the food system. And well, we need urgently to stop that and to try to bring populations to have a healthier diet. So that's one important, very important component of the failure of the food system. But there are other systems that are failing and that are bringing the problem of obesity. And for example, the education system, because we have a lot that we should be doing at schools to prevent obesity, and also the health system, the way in which we inform and we do action to prevent obesity is not working. Mainly we are focusing on the individual responsibility. So the world used to think that obesity was a problem of a failure in the individual, bad decisions. And we know now that it's more a problem of how we shape our environment and what are the access to healthy foods and the conditions of the people to do physical activity, to have information, health services, etc. So we really have information, we can have progress, but we have little time to do action, to detonate important action.
Let's talk about the indicators that you used in deciding individual countries' preparedness. What are these indicators, and those countries that are not prepared, what do you consider to be the key barriers preventing countries' readiness?
Well, I think the key barrier and one of the most important is that the changes that you need to do to your food system, your health system, and your education system, and to advance in obesity prevention have impacts on different economies and corporations. So these corporations obviously do not want these changes to happen. So there is a lot of industry interference. There is a lot of conflicts of interest when you attempt to implement policies. For example, if you want a country like Mexico or Argentina or Chile in Latin America to reduce their consumption of sugary beverages, you will face all the power of these corporations, which they not only own these industries, but they are also the owners of the industry of the communication. So, for example, television, newspapers, radio are all also owned by these powerful corporations. So it's very difficult, for example, to launch a campaign to make people reduce consumption of sugary beverages. So this is one of the main barriers, probably the biggest one. Obviously, there are others, access to water, for example, infrastructure, adequate conditions in the education system, etc. But the main one is the industry interference while implementing these policies.
I'm curious to know what ideal comprehensive obesity prevention policies look like from the perspective of the foundation.
Well, I think it's very important to have a policy of healthy taxes. So you need definitely to have taxes and in a good amount, not small taxes, but in a good amount for junk food, which is basically sugary beverages and ultra processed products. That's very important. And I will say that's a necessary condition because the governments need revenue for their action. These products cause a lot of negative externalities and government expenditure. So you at least need to put this tax to compensate. And in addition to these taxes, you need to put other healthy taxes. So, for example, taxes to the alcohol consumption and tobacco consumption, which is not really linked to obesity, but is linked to cancer and to many other diseases. So one part is a healthy taxes policy, and that needs to be in place. And then other one is good strategies at the to inform the people about these products. So the main one that has very good results around the world is the labeling of ultra processed products. So junk food labeling in the front of package. And that's, for example, in Latin America, many countries have implemented warning labels, which are these black octagons that say this product has excess of sodium, of salt, of sugar, of fat, of different ingredients. So that makes the product look ugly. And the more unhealthy ingredients, it will look uglier. And that makes people rapidly notice when a product is not very healthy, take quickly decisions. And we have evaluated that in Mexico, in Chile, and other countries, and it's very, very useful. So that's another one. And there are many others, like, for example, interventions at the school level. For example, in Brazil, there is no access at all to junk food products at schools. In Mexico, we just passed a law. So in the end of this month, it will be banned. All sugary beverages will be banned from schools, all ultra processed products. And then the marketing is another very important policy. There are countries in which they have characters, celebrities, influencers advertising all unhealthy products. The football federations are advertisers of sugary beverages, and we need to stop that because that's a way to attract our children to consume these products. And with this consumption is basically impossible to prevent obesity. So those are some of the conditions that a country has to have to be able to do some prevention.
Governments like additional source of revenue, and I think tax that you mentioned ought to be an attractive way to get government on board. But why do you think we still have a gap in policy? It can't just be the lobbying ability of the junk food industry, or do you think that is strong enough to discourage government from what could potentially be an additional source of revenue to finance good health outcomes for the citizens?
Yes, I think the main barrier is all the interests around avoiding these taxes, which are economic interests. And there are many groups. It's not only like the producers, but also the suppliers of ingredients for these producers, and also the corporations that give services to these corporations. For example, the marketing, the information, the news, radios, TV channels, all of them sell, for example, marketing services or spaces for communication to these corporations. So it's in the interest of all these groups to avoid policies that stop their growth in one hand. In other hand, if we don't stop the growth of these products in our populations, we will not stop obesity or the other non-communicable chronic diseases. So this is a necessary condition.
The analysis also emphasizes the strong connection between high BMIs and non-communicable diseases. So, how do you expect this to inform global health priorities?
Well, this is something very interesting. Many people is concerned with different non-communicable chronic diseases, and not many people is aware that one of the main drivers and one of the main reason all these non-communicable chronic diseases are increasing is because obesity is increasing. So yes, obesity looks as the main driver of high blood pressure, the main driver of diabetes, ischemic heart disease, cancer, and a very big number of diseases. Well, we need to use this report to raise awareness of that this is probably the low hanging fruit, the best way to address and to effectively prevent non-communicable chronic diseases is by tackling obesity with these policies and improving information and helping people make better choices and healthier lifestyles. And this will really then have an impact on the prevalence, which we hope we can achieve maybe in 5 years to 2030.
I'm curious to know whether there are integrated strategies that the foundation is recommending that can be deployed to simultaneously tackle obesity and non-communicable diseases like diabetes and heart disease.
Yes, there is, like, I will say, a policy toolkit, a set of recommendations that the federation is making to the governments. For example, one very straightforward recommendation is to have a national policy to prevent obesity. Many countries do not have a national policy, don't see the need of having a policy, and that's very important. However, we are realistic that not all countries are able or have the political will or the resources to implement a complete, comprehensive national policy to prevent obesity. And in those cases, as in many other things, we say everything works, everything helps. So the policy toolkit can be implemented as a comprehensive national policy, or the country can say, in this moment, we only have resources and political will to start with schools, with children, or to start to regulate marketing of unhealthy foods, or to start with the taxes of unhealthy products. So hopefully, the more policies they can add, it will be more effective. But if they can't, we are recommending that they start with what any intervention is possible for them to implement.
Given the findings that you have on ultra processed foods and sugar sweetened beverages, how do you see the role of the food industry evolving in the fight against obesity?
Well, I think in one hand, before trying to do these regulations, what we were watching is that the industry was making less and less quality products. So they were adding even every time more sugar, more flavors, more conservatives, artificial colorants, etc. Now that there is some awareness of the effects of these products on health and of the high amount of content of unhealthy ingredients, industries rapidly trying to shift to a healthier products. They are trying to reformulate. They are trying to identify other types of opportunities. And this is something that we are watching in Mexico. When we put the warning labels, all the sodas and all the sugary drinks had an average 7 gram per liter reduction in the amount of sugar. So yes, you can, with policies, develop incentives for them to develop products with a better nutrient profile. But that's not enough. Evidence is showing us that the less products we eat and the more real, fresh food we eat is better. So I will say I understand that they will not disappear. They will be there. They will improve the quality of their products, hopefully. But the focus of the national policies needs to be on protecting real diets and to promoting real diets and hydration with water and trying to reduce consumption of ultra processed foods.
You highlighted gender differences in physical activity. I'm curious to know whether there are gender responsive policies that have been most effective in any part of the world that you think we can highlight. And I'm also curious to know how you think countries can learn from these examples. What are the best practices out there, and how do you expect countries to learn from these best case scenarios?
Yes, this is a difficult but very important question. I think, yes, physical activity is a component. It's not, as they were saying before, 50% and 50%. No. Most of the problem is related to the bad diets. But physical activity has a very important role in health. It helps a little bit to maintain a healthy weight, but it also prevents other non-communicable chronic diseases. So it's very important. Physical activity, as you were mentioning, is very important that all governments have a policy to promote physical activity. And on the barriers to physical activity promotion, as you were mentioning, there are a lot that have to do with gender. In many countries, the females are still by societal structures responsible, for example, for attending the children's in their households and also preparing the food or maintaining the household, and that makes them reduce their access to to adequate physical activity in some cases. In other cases, the security and the environment is not good enough for women to, for example, be in the afternoon in the park walking or doing exercise. So it's a disincentive for women to do physical activity. And we see differences in body mass index, so in weight between men and women. Yes, there are a lot of challenges that have to do with gender, and there are very good cases. Obviously, in many developed countries, the rich countries have wonderful parks, public spaces with good infrastructure, good sidewalks, good tracks to walk, run, access to water for hydration, public bathrooms, everything. So those are, I guess, some cases of success. But it's more interesting to watch middle income countries like, for example, Brazil, where there are many public spaces in the main cities in which many people is like without having to pay a gym or a fee, is doing physical activity. And you can see women, you can see people from different ages, from 8 years to 80 years, and they are there. And that's a very good indicator how many spaces you have in which children from 8 years on and an adult of 80 years can be safely doing their physical activity comfortably. So this is something we need to look. And there are many countries, developing countries, in which we don't have enough sidewalks and they are not adequate. The illumination in the street is not adequate to be walking at night, for example, and during the day people is working. So it's complicated, but definitely the government needs to develop a policy of built environment that promotes hydration with water and physical activity over other things. So, for example, in these policies, you need to promote public transportation instead of driving by cars. You need to promote public parks instead of private gyms, etc. So there is a lot that the governments can do to improve access to physical activity in the population.
So I'm also curious to know about the role of how we frame obesity could play in addressing it. For instance, the report highlighted that obesity costs the world's economies trillions annually. Although we currently frame it as a public health issue, do you think framing it as an economic problem could make a much higher impact and help us in attracting the kinds of attention that could make an extensive difference?
Yes, I think you can frame the problem in different ways to make people see the relevance. So, yes, when we talk to people that is concerned with the economy of the country, so the ministries of economics, it's very important to show them that the impact of obesity is not only on the peoples, on the families, on the well-being and health, but also it affects directly the national gross domestic product, and by many points. Sometimes the effect of the condition over the economy is higher than the budget of the country for health. And that's the case of Mexico. So, for example, in Mexico, the budget for health is less than 5% of the gross domestic product. And the impact of obesity has been estimated around 6%. So basically, this needs to raise the awareness of two things for the economic sector. One is that they need to invest in preventing obesity because it's a good investment, because it's costing them a lot. And the other is that if they don't implement and if they don't control this condition, it will be very difficult to achieve economic growth. So this is what interests some people, not health, but economic growth. And that's an argument and a narrative that can work for them. But you can also make this case for environment. So if people is not interested on health, but interested on environment, you can demonstrate that addressing obesity is good for the environment, because all these products and all this food system that is causing obesity, when you change it to one that is healthier, it helps the environment. And when you do policies to improve public transportation as a way to improve health, you also are helping the environment. So yes, we need to have these narratives of double duty policies that help to prevent obesity and also to the economy or also to the environment.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what insight you got about the state of obesity on the African continent and responding to it. Are there any insights that you can share with me?
Yes, well, what we see, and this is something that I was not used to think about, like the focus, obviously, since I am Latin American, the focus of my research, but also during the last 20 years, the region that was growing more with obesity was Latin America. But what we see now is that in the future, the biggest increase in obesity will be seen in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in sub-Saharan countries, and that what shows is something that is very important, and that is we know what can happen there in terms of disease, in terms of gross domestic product, in terms of development, if we don't stop this growth of consumption, this changes in the food system, if people start reducing the quality of their diets and adding these industrialized products to their diets, there will be a huge impact to the economies and to the development of the continent. So we really need to be very serious about it. And I think Africa needs to be a focus of the international policies when you talk about obesity, which was not common. I mean, you don't used to talk of Africa when you talk about obesity, but now it's going to be the region of conflict if we don't really become very serious on policy implementation at the international agencies and also in the national governments.
Do we have insight into what is uniquely driving this on the continent?
I'm not sure if it's unique to the African countries because I see a lot of similarities to Latin America. Some of them are like the usual and very, very simple. So, for example, we have sometimes difficulty with the access to water. So, for hydration, the industrialized products are a simple way to bring access for hydration, but that's something that you can solve in many other ways that are healthy with the environment and with the people. So that's one first one that I think is unique. We have this problem of access to water in a weather in which you need to have hydration, and it's very convenient to have these products. The other one is that the economy is reaching a point in which people can afford these products. Before, when people cannot afford them, it's not interesting for the corporations, so there is not that big pressure on marketing and attracting children's and but at the moment that the country has some income and can afford these products, then they receive tons of investment in marketing, in factories, in distribution centers, in fabrics to do plastic for the bottles, and they get flooded by this pollution and all these systems. So I think that's another unique thing that many countries in Africa are now developing the capacity to be interesting, attractive consumers of these corporations, which are not African. These corporations are like, from developing countries, which they are not consuming that more because they are very concerned with their health, but they can do it in other countries. So this is something that we really need to stop. I would say those are two of the most important, and there are more, but these are two important for Africa.
We used to have COVID-19 impacting everything, but a couple of years after the acute phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, are we still seeing the impact of COVID-19, or do you think we've gone beyond the impact of COVID-19 on obesity?
That's yes, that's also maybe one of the topics in which we need to do something at the international level and in coordination. When you talk about preparedness, we need to be prepared because what happened with COVID will happen again. I mean, it's more likely to that we in the world experience another epidemic like COVID in the next years than not. And what we learn is that the people that was living with obesity had excess debt. So the results were really bad for countries like my country, in which there was a very high prevalence of obesity and non-communicable chronic disease. So we have an excess mortality that was huge. So if we want this to happen in a less impactful way in the future, we really need to prevent obesity and to transform our diets, because the connection was huge. And you can see it, the countries in the world that responded in the worst way was not the ones that were richer, or one of the main factors that was associated to the response by country was the prevalence of obesity and non-communicable chronic diseases. So I think there is a huge relation, and we need to think a lot about it and be prepared for the next pandemic, preventing obesity.
So now, what immediate steps do you think countries can take to improve their readiness and responsiveness to obesity as highlighted in the Atlas?
Well, that depends on at what point is the country currently. But for many countries, only to have a national policy will be fantastic, because that will be like we all have developed a plan, and then you can evaluate the plan, you can improve the plan, etc. But if you don't have the plan, you don't have like the basic pathway. Sometimes the plan allows you to see that you need to change some laws. For example, you need to put a lot of the right to healthy food in the constitution, and that will be raised in the national plan. So I will say first thing is to have a national plan, and then within the national plan, identify your big opportunities, the easier ones, and implement them, and then start working in the others. And there is a lot of international experience, so many countries will start to face opposition from industry, for example, while attempting to put taxes, and they don't have to develop new evidence or demonstrate them that the taxes will work, because there is plenty of resources around the world that show that taxes work to prevent obesity and to prevent consumption of unhealthy products. So that's where the World Obesity Federation also plays an important role. We have all the cases, and we have the information, and we have the atlas, which is showing the countries what other countries are doing and what are the impacts of this action. So I think in a way that is also very important. The last one, which I think is very important for the countries, is that you can have national officers of the government doing a plan, but they will finish in 4 or 6 years, and they will go out from the government, and everything will like restart. And the new government will, you need to see if there is political will in the new government, if they want to do it or not, etc. So that model takes a lot of time to have results. But if you add civil society to the equation, if you have their associations from the population that are stakeholders and are participating in this policy, they will push and also help the government to have continuity in the policies and to be accountable for what is needed. If you don't have this civil society, it's most likely the corporations, the ones that will, with their power, guide the government actions.
How will you personally describe the trend regarding global awareness on obesity over the years?
Yes. I will say that the trend is for more and more awareness. So I guess 30 years ago, it was seen in many regions of the world as a problem of the rich. So nobody was in public policies was interested on investing in obesity, because they say, well, this is a problem of the rich, and it's an individual problem. So if they need to fix something, they need to fix it, not the government or not the public policies. And I think we have learned over the years this problem is growing every year. So now there is a lot of awareness, I guess, particularly in the countries where there is very high prevalence. But we still need to do a lot, because this awareness, although it has increased, it is not being translated in more investment to treat obesity. So that's something that is of concern.
Despite the challenges that the Atlas has highlighted and that you've also mentioned, what are you optimistic about regarding global obesity landscape and generally interventions?
Well, when we started, for example, with taxes, it was controversial. We had to demonstrate that taxes work, and it took us like 10 years. Now everybody knows that taxes work to reduce consumption of unhealthy products. So I am optimistic that other countries will not have to lose 10 years of their, because this is not losing losing only the time, it's losing lives or losing quality of life and losing opportunities to develop. So I am optimistic that many countries will now directly, without all this cost, be able to prevent some of the effect. This is something I am optimistic. I am also optimistic that there is now a movement in which we understand that this is not an individual problem. People living with the condition will not be stigmatized as much, and we hope and we fight for reducing this stigma on the individual, because it's really not, I really am convinced that it's not their fault, problem of the systems that are failing. So this is another thing I am optimistic. And then I'm starting to see good results in different countries, which make us think that we are very close to have like success. For example, Saudi Arabia have 50% taxes, and the reduction in sugary beverage was 35%. That is huge. I watching in Mexico, we have been able to reduce the triglyceride levels with the warning labels and with the taxes, and that's good. In Brazil, they are doing this national program at schools, and that's very important. So I think there are many countries that are starting to identify ways to do national action, which was very difficult before. So that will definitely have better results in the future than what we have achieved until now. And I want to see that. I'm sure that in 5 years or in less than 10 years, we will be watching some countries being successful in stopping the rise of obesity.
There is this concern in public health landscape regarding how the reduction in public funding for health issues, international funding for some health issues, could actually threaten the progress made. For instance, we are seeing potential impact on infectious disease response, HIV, where most of the funding is coming from. What does it look like in the fight against obesity? Or do you think the fight against obesity is protected or insulated against what seems to be a serious reduction in global funding for public health issues?
Yes, I agree with you. I agree. And this is probably the main challenge that we are facing in the advancement of the policies. So traditionally, obesity is one of the conditions and diseases in which there is less investment and less support. And you can watch the foundations and the big health agencies, and this is not one of the areas in which they invest. And there are many reasons, from the stigma of the disease to the view as something that has to do more with individual behavior, etc. So we are trying to also raise advocacy on the importance of investment and how easy it is to get returns from this investment. So this is an investment that you really get your return because it has immediate impact on growth and quality of life. But yes, I am concerned. I don't think the conditions around the world are good now. I don't think we are expecting good times in terms of investment. So we need to be very efficient. We need to be very smart with our advocacy and very strategic in our interventions and action. And also maybe we need to learn to work together. There is a lot of work in silos. So many people is defending their silo. So you can see groups advocating for actions to prevent high blood pressure and actions to prevent diabetes, actions to prevent cancer, actions to prevent obesity. And when you see the toolkit of actions is very similar. I guess we also um, need to learn to work together and to be more efficient.
Are you concerned that countries or other stakeholders may consider obesity as of lower priority when they want to prioritize what to spend their very limited funding on?
Well, that has been something that is real and has been happening, and I guess our job is to show them, and we have all the science behind to prove that that's not how it works. That on reality is very important and very high priority because it's a low hanging fruit. It's a way to prevent a lot of conditions. It's basically by investing in obesity prevention. So I guess that's one of the main objectives and tasks and things that in which we need to have an impact. as a federation, as and civil society around the world. We need to be good enough to show them that this needs to be a priority in their agenda.
Thank you very much. So, what are your last remarks for me?
Well, maybe you already mentioned it, but this year we called our World Obesity Day "Changing Systems, Healthier Lives," and I think that's the four words that are abstract or that resumes our talk. We need to change systems. We need to make systems that help us be healthier, and this is something that requires not only the health personnel, but we need to work with education, economy, the food system, etc. And if we do that, then we will have impact on obesity.
Thanks so much, Simon. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. It was a pleasure to talk with you.